Welcome to the DIY Writer Show with the mild-mannered, slightly heroic host, Jeff Bacon.
This is Jeff with the DIY Writer Podcast, and today I have JD Cunegan, who his last name evidently is the Scottish root of Cunningham, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of cool that he just told me that too. So let's just jump right into how you doing, JD?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Hey, you know what? It's always my pleasure to talk to an author. So you're doing good. Everything's fine. Life's good.
Yeah.
Got it.
Just dealing with things as best I can. Working from home on my day job some days, working in the office some days. But you know,
what do you do for a day job?
I work media relations for college athletics, which is very interesting.
Ooh.
And has been for the last 10 months or so. It's hard to do college athletics when there are no athletics going on.
Pretty much. They've had a little bit. I guess it depends on what division you're in. But what about college?
We're in the middle of basketball season right now. We're one of those levels that's doing football in the spring, so we'll see how that goes. But at this point, I'm just glad that I still have a job. I'm glad that I'm still getting a check every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of people who can't say that right now. So
yeah, no kidding. It is it's an interesting time to be alive, but it's also for a lot of people very hard.
Yeah.
And that's rough. But
I'm thinking all those people who said they'd like to live through history, maybe rethink that, because in some ways it's a little overrated.
Yeah, I know an old guy who said, the best thing about the good old days is that they're gone.
Yep.
And it as I progress in years, it's like, there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Which, when we're talking about wisdom, let's talk about the art of reading.
Okay.
All right.
It's I wrote a nonfiction book. That's something I never really thought I would ever do. But the longer I go as a published author and the deeper I am immersed in the self-published, independently published author community, I see people who try to argue that you can be a successful writer without reading. And I don't think that's right. I don't buy that for a second. First of all, if you believe that, then you're trying to tell me that Stephen King, of all people, is wrong. Stephen King famously wrote in his book on writing that if you don't have the time to read, you have neither the time nor the tools to be an author. And I tend to agree with that, not just in the sense of if you're going to be a writer and you want people to read your work, reading is something that by definition you have to be able to do yourself. But by the same token, I've noticed that when I'm at my most productive as a writer, I'm also doing a lot of reading. So the more reading I'm doing, the more writing I'm doing. I don't necessarily get writer's block, but I've noticed that the periods when I'm having a hard time writing, literally putting words on the page, are periods of time when, for whatever reason, I'm not reading as much, if at all, as I normally do. So I felt the need to write The Art of Reading simply to make my case that you absolutely have to be a reader if you want to be a writer and be a successful writer. And by successful, I mean productive. Mm-hmm. Reading won't necessarily help you sell your book better. I'm proof of that. But the more you read and the more different kinds of things you read, the more productive you will become as a writer, the better your writing will become. And I liken it to a bank account in the sense that whenever you sit down and you write something, you're making a withdrawal from your bank account. If all you're doing is making that withdrawal, eventually you're just going to run out of money. When you're reading, you're putting deposits in your creative bank account. So I think you need to do both. And one of the things I try to do is set aside a little time each day where I write a little and read a little. If I have a day where I have to go into the office for my day job, I'll take a book with me and I will read while I'm eating my lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what book I'm reading, that might be not even a full chapter, but I've read something that day. Sometimes I'll get up in the morning and write before I do anything else during the day. Sometimes I'll wait till nighttime to write. But making a little progress each day is better than a whole heap of progress on one day and then a week where you've done nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you only manage to write 2 sentences in a day, that's 2 sentences more than you had at the start of the day. And days off are important for a creative person. You know, if you give yourself 1 day per week where you say, I'm not doing anything creative today, that's important, because rest is as important as reading and as important as being productive at the keyboard or your pad of paper or however it is you actually get words on the page.
Hmm.
It's all interconnected. I don't believe that you can be a successful, productive author without reading. I'm sure there's probably somebody out there who will prove me wrong, but based on personal experience, mostly personal experience, I found that the more I'm reading, the better and more productive I am as a writer. So that's really the impetus behind writing The Art of Reading, and why I decided that when I did finally dip my toe in the nonfiction realm, that was where I decided to do it.
See, I know people that would argue with you, not from the point of reading's important, but also they would expand it and say, okay, I include audiobooks in that, and I include movies, and I include, comic books and, cartoons, and they'll include all sorts of different media in there. And it's kind of funny when people try and defend their entire lifestyle on, well, you kind of need to read. And I don't think it gets, that's really the point. The point is you got to have some sort of exposure. I think an audiobook would be my pass. I would say, listening to an audiobook that's read while you're driving. Yeah, I would think that counts somewhat, but I don't find that that's nearly as you're not as focused on an audiobook as you are when you're sitting down and just reading something.
Specifically to audiobooks, I agree with that. I have a hard time focusing on an audiobook, but I understand why people like that particular, it's not a genre, but a format. But to your point about whether or not audiobooks, comic books, movies, TV shows, all that should count, I think they absolutely do.
Okay.
Comic books were what inspired me to become a creative person in the first place. Some of my best ideas have come from TV shows or movies, and the best, most popular musical from the past 5 years or so came about because Lin-Manuel Miranda read a biography about Alexander Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
So you go from historical biography to Broadway musical. So you can absolutely make cross format jumps like that.
Sure.
And I do think it's possible to quote unquote read a TV show. Obviously not in the way you would read a book, but even if you're someone who wants to write TV shows or movies, take a movie or a TV show you really liked and track down the script for that movie or TV show, and you can read that.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason I wrote this book is, for the most part, I'm not a big fan of books on writing.
Okay.
There are a couple of exceptions. On writing, I mentioned that before. And Chuck Wendig wrote a book called Damn Fine Story.
Okay.
And I really like that book. But for the most part, books on writing either bore me to tears, or they make the process of writing sound so intimidating that you never want to pick up the pen again.
I think some classes do that too.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, you can Truby, I bought into his stuff for a little bit, and I stopped watching it because I found myself questioning every damn thing I did. And it's like, okay, he just locked me up because he's got this vortex, and this one is like, screw it. I was doing just fine before I met him. All right, he's done, you know,
Yep.
type thing.
My last
Stephen King's on writing. I kind of give it a 50%.
mhm.
You know, I'm a big Stephen King fan, and I like some of the stuff he says in there, and some of the stuff he says, I'm like, nah, that doesn't work for me. You know,
The reason I like it is he doesn't try to, for the most part, I don't take it as him saying this is gospel, this is the one true correct way to do it, which a lot of books on writing do. A lot of books on writing will tell you this is the one true correct way to do it.
that's true.
And I've found that there is no one true correct way to do it. There's a way that works for me, there's a way that works for you, there's a way that works for whoever's writing James Patterson's books at that particular time. I think
Yeah,
writing is such a unique personal thing that there's no one size fits all approach to it, other than sit your butt down and write the words. But that won't make for a very long book. So I don't, this is as close as you will ever see to me writing a book on writing, a book on reading.
Okay. Which it all makes sense. The you know, the one thing that that I, you know, Stephen King's backstories in that book too, kind of, you know, like we're in Maine and and I thought that was tremendously interesting. And then he get into, you know, how he writes and what he does, and, you know, so on and so forth. Again, very interesting. But there's a lot of things that he does in his life that it's like, yeah, that never worked for me. You know, it's just not the way I work. And again, you know, you point out it's different strokes for different folks type of a thing.
Yeah. And it's funny, when I started reading that book and I'm reading through a lot of that backstory, at first I'm thinking, did I pick up the wrong book? And it wasn't until much later in the book that I realized what he was doing by giving us basically his memoir before getting into the writing biz, which is fine. That's a great way to do it. It's just, I don't think anybody would particularly care all that much about, when I was 11 years old, I discovered comic books and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. You know what, you know, just kind of sticking on the Stephen King, you know what really ticks me off? The series Castle Rock.
I don't think I've read that one.
Uh,
I'm very hit or miss on Stephen
this is
King.
actually a TV show. It's on Hulu.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so it's filling in all these little different tidbits from the books. You know, so it's got Jerusalem's Lot, Salem's Lot, Castle Rock. You know, it's all these different places that are, you know, easily traveled location wise on a map, you know, in his world. And it's kind of funny because you watch it and you're like, oh, that's from, you know, in whatever book it happens to be in. And, you know, some people just like it just because, you know, it's a nice little funny, you know, kind of horror series, you know, whatever. But the amount of tidbits that he puts in there from, you know, ranging from just about every book he's written is like, holy crap, this is like brilliant. So brilliant that it makes me sick.
And he's written a lot of books too. So.
Yes, but you know, it's just these little towns. You know, there's some references to, you know, like Carrie, and there's some references to, you know, again, Salem's Lot, and, you know, the Christine, is in there a little bit, as far as you can see the car,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if they did this. Like I said, it's just this combination of things. He's written so much that they made stories out of sidelines from his books. And it's like, holy buckets. That makes me sick that you can do that. Awesome.
And he just sits back and counts the money.
I doubt, yeah, you can tell he had an influence on everything that happened in there, because it's very, like Shawshank is in there and all the
Mhm.
weird stuff that's happened in Shawshank, and it is just so cool. And again, being I grew up on his books. I'm like, oh my God, it just takes me back, and it just is wonderful. But again, that would be a visual thing. It's not a reading thing, but I got hooked into that, and I had to binge watch both seasons real quick. And it's like, oh my God, I know exactly what they're talking about. That's sick. That's wrong. But
Well, like I say, you can get the same creative boost from a TV show that you can from reading a novel or a short story collection. It's all under the same umbrella, because I've been just as influenced and inspired by TV shows as I have from books. Sometimes more so, but the underlying premise is still the same.
I think more times than not, I'll watch a movie because it's based on a book, and I'll be thoroughly disappointed in the movie more times
Hmm.
than not. Every now and then it's like, oh, they really expanded. Oh, that's cool, or something that was written that I had visualized differently, and then they portrayed a different way in the movie or the series or whatever. I think that's very interesting. But the changes in your perception of what's going on, I think, are sometimes fun.
I think it's interesting to do a study of formats when it comes to books and the movies based on them. Just from the standpoint of, how do the people who make the movie make the decision what to cut, what to keep, what to change, and particularly if it's a book I've read. Like, I devoured the Hunger Games trilogy in like 2 weeks,
Okay.
which I'm not a particularly fast reader, so that was an achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go and I watch the first Hunger Games movie,
Hmm.
and as typical, I prefer the books to the movies, to the point where I didn't even watch the other movies.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to sit back and think, okay, what did they change? What did they take out? Why did they take out what they took out? And I know some writers who want to write novels and screenplays and other things, and that would be a good thought exercise for people like them. But it was also interesting to see, you know, the movie comes out and everybody's outraged about this one character who happens to be black, and I'm sitting there going, did you not read the book? Because the book was quite clear that this character is black. But it's interesting, the things that will set off social media rants and outrage, and it's fascinating. But at the same time, I'm with you. 99 times out of 100, if it's a movie based on a book, I prefer the book.
So do you pay attention to social media on that kind of stuff? Because I at this point in my life, I kind of stopped. I'm kind of done.
I pick and choose my spots,
Yeah.
because every once in a while a topic will come up that I have to say something about. I'll say my piece, and then I'll let it go. This is one of the benefits of being someone. I have a good number of followers, but I don't get a whole lot of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I post something, my mentions aren't going to blow up.
Yeah.
Unless I make an offhanded comment in someone else's tweet about something else entirely. I'll get a lot of stuff. I'll get a lot of notes from that, but my original stuff doesn't generate hundreds and hundreds of notes of stuff. So 9 times out of 10, I'll see something, feel like I have to say something. I'll say whatever it is I've got to say, and I just move on. I've oddly enough, these last 4 years have taught me the value of moderation in social media, not just in terms of how you deal with haters or anything like that, but just learn when to put the phone down.
Yeah.
It's okay to take a break from Twitter. It's okay to let Facebook sit for a day or two. The world isn't going to end if you go 3 hours without updating your Instagram feed.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. And I know that there's always this argument on Twitter over how much writers should expose of themselves on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Are you on Twitter just to promote your work and talk about writer stuff? Or do you also use your Twitter platform to champion political causes that matter to you, to talk about other things you're interested in? I'm very much all of the above. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll get a ton of book stuff, not just the books I write, but the books I read. I'm very vocal about the books that I love, especially if they're self or independently published. I will talk all day about a book I love as I'm reading it. I tweet a lot about hockey because I'm a Washington Capitals fan. I tweet a lot about NASCAR because I'm a big NASCAR fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I have political opinions that I am not shy about sharing on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I'm concerned, the fact that I'm a creator does not preclude me from having opinions outside of the creative world. Because I'm still, at the end of the day, I'm still a person. I'm still an American citizen.
Mm-hmm.
I vote in every election I can, national, state, or local. And if I have something to say, I'm going to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And 95% of my followers will agree with me. 5% won't. And they'll either just leave it be or they'll unfollow me, which, fine. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's like I said earlier, it's okay to put the phone down. You don't have to respond to every single thing you see or hear.
See, and I don't post anything too political because I just don't want to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't.
And that's fair.
You know, but on the other hand, I am so sick and tired of these idiots that get up on their pedestal and they sit there. I think it's great to have a debate.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna sit there and be a pissy little bitch and argue on the internet about things that you have no control of. You're wasting time. Go do something. You know,
And I tell the people who do try to argue with me, I'm going to put this out there. I am decidedly anti-Trump. I have been anti-Trump from day one, vocally so. And, I'll get a couple of his supporters in my mentions and they'll try to argue and they'll tell me, I'm not buying your books. Okay. You wouldn't like my books anyway.
see now that
the only reason I say they wouldn't like my books anyway is because I make it a point in my work to be racially and sexually inclusive in terms of the characters I write about. So just from that alone, I know that my work is not their cup of tea.
Right.
And that's okay with me. It's a lot like something Kurt Cobain once said, that racist, homophobes, misogynists, he didn't want them buying his band's music. He didn't want those types of people as fans. And he was vocal about that. And he made a lot more money doing what he did than I am doing what I'm doing.
he did all right for himself.
Yeah, so I understand. I understood the point Michael Jordan was making back in the 90s when people were trying to get him to speak out about stuff. And he had that famous line of Republicans buy sneakers too. Yep. I get that. I understand the argument and I can appreciate the argument that he was not trying to diminish the potential number of people who could buy his sneakers. Mm-hmm. And I understand that I'm making a calculation when I tell Trump supporters, you're not going to like my work anyway, I don't want you as a fan. I understand that I'm making a calculation there that hits me financially. But this also goes back to, why do you write? Why are you a creator? If you're only in it to make as much money as you possibly can, good luck to you. But I write these stories because I have things to say. God, that sounds pretentious when I put it out there like that. And you know, if a handful of people decide they don't want to buy my work because we diverge on this area over here, okay, I'm comfortable with that.
I laugh because today I published my 56th podcast, and it's Frank Butterfield, and he has a series of 70 some books.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's an animal as far as writing, but his main series is Nick and Carter, and you know, they're a gay couple that have lived through decades and decades of history, and he just picks, you know, historical things and just makes up, hey, Nick and Carter were involved with this, you know, and kind of gives a backstory, and it's a mystery series or whatever. And I picked up one of his books and read it, and you know, if you're going to sit there and say, well, you know, I'm not really going to support anything that's got any kind of gay material in it or wall, well, that's fine, but you're going to be missing a lot of really good literature, because he writes, he's fantastic. You know, I don't care if it's, you know, gay or not, it's a great story, you know, and the way he ties in the amount of research that he does and ties it in. He says, oh, it's not much research, but yeah, he does a really good job of bringing in the actual historical events and then creating a fiction out of it. And he does it fast. And it's like, you know, you read his work and you're like, oh shoot, dude, that's awesome.
I'm happy if I get 2 books out a year.
Yeah, he's like I said, he's on pace. He's quick. But
It's I'll tell you, by far my worst selling book is the 3rd book in the Jill Anderson series, Behind the Badge. It is absolutely my worst selling book.
Really?
And what happens is it's a book about police brutality. I hadn't planned for it to be.
Okay.
That was just the direction that series took, and with this was around the time where you had what was going on in Ferguson, what was going on with Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Eric Garner, case after case after case after case after case, and it was like every other week there was another name to add to the list, and it became a question of, A, how can I continue to write a series of books featuring police officers and not touch on the issue of police brutality at some point? And B, how would my character in particular react to something like that? What would Jill do if she came upon a murder scene and discovered that her victim was killed by her coworkers? So it was as much a character study as anything, but I knew in the process of writing that book, there are going to be some people who don't like this.
Yeah.
Because the way Jill reacted to it, the way the story unfolded, the points that I was trying to make with regards to that particular issue. And it was not easy. It is not easy to make a point about an issue without beating your reader over the head with it.
Yeah.
I think I went through like 4 or 5 drafts before I finally got to a point where I thought, okay, I made my point, but I'm not on my soapbox with a baseball bat here. But I knew when I wrote that book, there are going to be some people who don't like this.
Yep.
There are going to be some people who will refuse to read this book. And I was okay with that because A, what I said needed to be said, and B, it was the natural progression of the series to that point. And I learned a long time ago, you don't control your characters. Your characters control you.
And that's truth.
And you know, I got into an argument with a reader over this. I said, well, why can't you write book 3 about something else? Like, because then it wouldn't feel genuine.
Because
And then
not to.
and then you would read book 3 and then come back to me and tell me this is crap. Write a better book than this. Well, you wanted something other than what I wanted to write.
Yep.
So and it's my worst selling book, but I think it's my most consequential to this point. And what disturbs me is I released that book in 2016.
Yep.
And we're still, George Floyd over the summer and all that. So I'm finding myself returning to the issue again in subsequent books because the issue's not going away. And the city of Baltimore being the way it is, the issue doesn't go away up there either. So if I'm going to continue this series in the vein of my characters being involved in law enforcement, I have to occasionally dip my toe back in the swimming pool, so to speak.
Well, not to be mistaken, I mean, there's an awful lot of police out there. I mean,
Yes.
there's a bunch of them, and there's a bunch of really good ones, and there's a few bad ones out there. I mean, the percentages I'm hoping are most of them are good.
And one of the things I'm starting to tackle is when I first wrote about this, it was very much, here are the good cops, here are the bad cops. It's a very clearly delineated line. It's very black and white. Now we're getting to the issue of where it's less about the individuals and more systemic, where you've got a case where you've got good cops who, for the sake of either their own professional well-being or whatever, maybe don't speak up when they should. And then it becomes a matter of, what does good policing look like, not just from an individual good cop, bad cop standpoint, but what would it look like not to defund the police, but to reform the police? What would a reformed police department look like? Can the police department be reformed? So those are the questions that I'm sort of tackling in my fiction now, which isn't helped by recent nonsense where on the one hand you see, oh, this cop over here is acting selflessly and heroically, and then over here there's one who's in cahoots with the knuckleheads. It's an incredibly complex situation that people on both sides of the issue try to act like isn't complex.
That's true.
And which I think that's part of our problem. We're unwilling to address the complexities of an issue. You're either on this side or you're on this side, and there's nothing in between.
How many times have you been sitting at work and you're totally in the middle of a gray issue? I mean, there is, I can tell you from my personal experience, there have been lots of times where it's really, there is no good answer. So you just have to pick a direction. Is it this right or left? Okay. Crap. They both suck. Which one sucks less? Well, you're not quite sure, and that's kind of the way it is with life too. I mean, there are very few things in the world that are totally black and white. And if you think there's black and white on everything, then that might not be reality. That might be closer to fiction than you think.
It's interesting. My day job, I work for a conference that's comprised exclusively of historically black colleges. And I am the only white staff member in the conference office. Everyone else is black.
Sure.
And I worked at an HBCU before then, and it was to the point where I would travel with the basketball team. It'd be a travel party of about 20, 25 people. Most of the time, I'm the only white person in the travel party. Occasionally, there would be two. Sometimes we had an athletic trainer who was white who traveled with us. And you want to talk about eye-opening. Not necessarily in seeing how bad things are.
Whoops. We lost your audio for a second.
It's can you hear me now?
Yep.
It's not, it wasn't eye-opening in the sense of me oh wow, black people have it really hard, but just in some of the humorous interactions that I would have with the people I'm traveling with. Like we're at an airport getting ready to go somewhere, and I'm the one who doesn't have to go through the metal detector. Yeah.
Huh.
But yeah, so there is some push and pull there, being, you know, you grow up for 30 years of your life being the majority, and then professionally for the last decade I've been the racial minority.
Yeah.
And it's eye-opening in a very good way, I think. And it was funny because I had a coworker once tell me, you should write a book about your experience as a white man working at HBCUs. I said, nah, I'm first of all, I'm not the only one. There are white people who work at these schools. There are white people who go to these schools. And let them tackle that. I'm not qualified to write on that subject at all. I like examining issues of race and things like that through the prism of fiction. And I'll read nonfiction books about stuff like that, but I'm never going to write one because I don't have the intellectual gravitas for that.
Don't you think that through fiction you can handle these issues better than you could in a nonfiction book? I mean, realistically, you know, if you're going to write a nonfiction book on something like that, you're going to be fact checked from one side or the other and ridiculed for it. But if you're writing fiction, you can actually create, you know, whether it's dystopian or whatever it is, and you can really emphasize what you're trying to bring out in the book. And, you know, in a fictional way that makes it, you know, kind of slap you in the face, versus, you know, a nonfiction book, you may not be able to do that because you haven't, you know, you may have heard of something, but you haven't experienced it. So how do you write about it? You know,
and not only that, if I write a nonfiction book in which I decry the evils of police brutality, how many people who disagree with me are going to buy the book?
Right.
A lot of the chances are a lot of the people who buy that book and read it are going to be people who already agree with me.
Right.
I'm not going to, I don't know how many minds I would change with a nonfiction book in which I'm beating you over the head with the topic. I don't know how much more likely, but I would imagine I'm more likely if I couch it in a fictional narrative that maybe gets somebody to think about the issue in a way they hadn't thought of it before, and then they start to come around on it. So I think you're more apt to changing minds writing it in through the lens of fiction than you do through nonfiction, because, you know, if you buy, oh, Rachel Maddow wrote a book about such and such, well, who's going to buy that book? Rachel Maddow fans.
Right.
People who don't agree with her are not going to buy her books. And the same is true for Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and all that. People who disagree with them are not going to go out and buy their books. I mean, I saw where Newt Gingrich wrote a novel once, and like, I don't care if it's fiction. I'm still not going to buy a Newt Gingrich book.
I don't know that I would either. I just, you know, I don't know. There hasn't been anyone that you've mentioned in the last two sentences that I buy a book from, to be honest with you. There are so many better authors out there. you know. And the other thing that pisses me off is these people that are very famous and, you know, so you say they write a book. Did they really write the book, or did they have it ghost written? You know, and the other thing that pisses me off is that they have a platform that is second to none to promote it. Versus us poor slobs down here, we're like, hey, we have a book. Somebody buy it, please. And no one listens. You know, I mean, they do a little bit, but I mean, you know, it's not like you can be Pierce Bronson or Pierce,
Pierce Morgan.
Morgan. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Sitting there every day on the morning show going, you know, I wrote this book, you know, going out to millions of people and they buy it. It's like, you know, just out of pure jealousy, I'd be like, screw you.
This is why I don't write book reviews for traditionally published books.
Yeah.
I'll give them a star rating on Goodreads, but I won't sit down and write an actual, like, if I were to read a Michael Connelly book, I'm not going to write a review about it. Because Michael Connelly doesn't need my review.
Right.
He's a multi-cajillionaire, whether he knows I read his book or not. But a self-published author like me, if I read your book and I love it, I'm gonna scream about that book as much as I can. I'm gonna write the review on Goodreads, on Amazon, on my blog. I might do a YouTube post about it. I'll talk about it on Twitter, because those are the people who need and can benefit most from that sort of review. Which is also why if I read a self-published book and I don't like it, I don't write a review on it. Because a negative review will hurt an indie author far more than a traditionally published author.
Oh yeah.
If I give the Da Vinci Code 1 star,
nobody cares.
Dan Brown is going to turn over on his pile of money and go right back to sleep. and I think that's a good lesson for all sorts of writers. No matter what you write, somebody's not going to like it.
Oh yeah.
The Pattersons and the Dan Browns and the Patricia Cornwells and the Michael Connollys of the world all have people who cannot stand their books. So I learned a long time ago that if I get a 1 or 2 star review on one of my books, that's just the nature of it.
Yep.
I worry far more about the people who never even give my work the time of day than I do the people who read it and decided, I don't like that.
I actually stopped caring about that too. Realistically, it just, you know, get it out there, and the people that want to pick it up, and the people that don't, you know, you can't sit there and worry about them. You know, you can maybe put it in front of them somehow, some way through advertising or, you know, newsletter swaps or, you know, whatever. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, if they don't pick it up, usually it's because I did something that they don't like.
Yeah.
You know, the cover didn't appeal to them, or the book blurb, or, you know, whatever. Or they read, you know, a 1-star review that talks about Pentecostal tripe or something like that. And it's like, well, you know, whatever.
We can't make them click buy.
Nope. We can't. Nothing you can do about it. All you can do is write your story.
Yep.
So we talked an awful lot about you know, reading and reviews and a little bit on political stuff and police brutality and everything else. But why don't we talk a little bit about your series? Because we really haven't gotten into that too much.
Oh, this is it's a little bit murder mystery. It's a little bit superhero. It's a little bit thriller. Jill Anderson is a homicide cop in the city of Baltimore, and she's also the superhero Bounty. Because when I was in high school, I read a comic book called Witchblade that had a homicide cop character who was a superhero.
Oh, Witchblade.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Half the time I mention that and I get a blank stare, which makes me feel really old, because I realized high school was over 20 years ago. And
no, that, you know, they I think they had a series on that too at one point in time.
Yeah, it was a short-lived TV show on TNT.
Yeah.
That was not very good.
No, it wasn't very good, but it was just impressive that they picked it up. Because it was
they keep talking about they're going to do a movie on it, but I don't think that's ever going to get off the ground. They've redone the comic book series with a completely new character, and it's a lot more of a horror genre thing now
Okay.
than what it was before. It's good, but it wasn't what the original was.
Hmm.
So yeah, Witchblade in a roundabout way sort of inspired me to create Bounty. The series is 5 books in. I released the 5th book, Betrayal, back in April. I actually managed to publish a book during the pandemic.
Oh, way to go.
Hey everybody, I know the world's on fire right now, but could you buy my book?
Yeah.
I'm in the process of writing book 6, Bitter End, right now. That should be out about middle of the year. It won't be the end of the series, but it will be the end of the current arc and the current villain.
Okay.
Which is funny. The current villain is a man named David Greger. He's a morally abhorrent billionaire with ties to Russia.
Wow, that's weird.
I swear I created him back in high school. And it was funny because I wrote the first draft for Bounty back in 2014. It was my National Novel Writing Month project. And when I gave it to my editor called me up and she said, "I love the book. It's great." She goes, "I just have one problem." I said, "What's that?" She goes, "I'm not sure how believable your villain is." I said, what do you mean? What's wrong with Gregor?" She goes, "I don't know how Russia works as a boogeyman anymore."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Well, you got to understand, I grew up in the back end of the Reagan years into the first George Bush at the back end of the Cold War. So for me, Russia was the big boogeyman back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to get away from what everyone else seemed to be doing, where it's either Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Iran or something like that. I wanted to get away from that. So I'll just shout out to my childhood. Here's Russia. Then 2016 happened, and I emailed my editor. I'm like, "Not so believable now, is it?" But I will say he was a lot more fun to write before 2016.
Mm.
So I'm going to be kind of glad to be done with him when Bitter End comes out later in the year. But it's very much, it's been described as Castle meets Daredevil, which is
Okay.
interesting. Which is interesting because when I watched the Daredevil Netflix series, I thought to myself, if I ever get the phone call and somebody wants to turn my series into a Netflix series, that's exactly what I want it to be like. It's like with the tone and everything that Daredevil is, I want that. Then you throw in the police procedural on top of it, which is a genre that I don't really do all that great with, but it makes sense because most of my characters are homicide cops.
Sure.
So it'd be kind of weird to have a bunch of homicide cops and there's no murder to solve.
That would be odd. Yeah.
They all just sit there twiddling their thumbs all day. But I'm finding ways to make sure the series doesn't grow stale on me, because I want it to be the sort of series where the stories interconnect. I don't want it to be like the Kathy Reichs Temperance Brennan books, where each book is its own self-contained story, and the characters never there's no growth with the characters. They're the same from book to book, and that's great, for someone who may parachute in on book number 12. But to me, and this may just be my comic book background, the series is to build upon what was there before, not just in terms of the story, but in terms of how the characters grow and evolve.
Yeah.
I do still try to write them in a way to where if somebody parachutes in on book 4, they're not completely lost. But this is very much turning into a serialized, one book leads directly to the next kind of thing.
What my editor tells me is that they should be able to jump right in the middle of the series and be able to kind of pick up on things. But that book, each book should make you want to read the first one and go back through them. You know,
Absolutely. I agree with that.
It is kind of the way that that my editor says that things should be done.
I
Sometimes it
always
happens that way.
I always laugh when somebody says, I bought this book. Which one in the series is it? Well, first of all, on the page on Amazon, it says Jill Anderson number whatever.
Right.
And if you buy the paperback, when I redid the covers a couple years ago, I had the genius notion of put the number on the spine.
Wow. Genius.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that the first time, but when I redid the covers, it's like, wait a minute, I should put the number here just in case.
Just in case.
And I get people who still ask me, which book is this?
9. Book 9.
Never, yeah, book 9, even though I'm still writing book 6.
Yeah, well, you know.
Time travel.
Time travel. There you go.
I haven't figured out how to write a time travel story yet, but I'll use it in real life.
Boy, yeah, I'm not going to get into that. Never mind. Time travel and you know, the quantum stuff. If I was to bring that up, we get into a conversation about Q, and it'd be like, no, let's not go there.
No.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyway, so we're kind of running up on an hour here. So any last words to your readers or fans or anything like that?
You can find me on the internet at jdcuneganbooks.com. That's JDCUNEGAN books.com. All of my work is there. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble Nook, Kobo, Apple iBooks, Smashwords, and paperback. You can also buy from me directly signed copies.
Okay.
And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All of the links are at jdcuneganbooks.com.
Okay. And I'll have those links in the show notes so that if somebody, you know, didn't quite have time to write that down, they'll be able to just click on the link and, you know, on YouTube or wherever they happen to be listening to this at.
Be sure to check out my latest release, The Art of Reading, how reading can make you a better, more productive writer. And also be on the lookout later this year for Bitter End, book 6 in the Jill Anderson series, as well as the launch of a new series and also a lesbian assassin thriller trilogy that I'm planning to release all this summer. And you can find all the details on that on my website as well.
Wow, you're going to be busy this winter.
Yeah, true. Well, I've had a lot of time to write these last 10 months or so. So I'm making up for the fact that I went like 3 years without a new release. So I'm making up for lost time.
Ah.
I don't know how good a year 2021 is going to be for a lot of people, but for me creatively, I'm looking to make it a really good year.
You're going to be kicking it in the pants, it sounds.
That's the hope.
That's the hope. That's the goal. Well, very cool. You know what? It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been great, but thank you for having me.
Oh no, it's been interesting. I have really enjoyed our conversation. Again, I'll have all the links in the show notes and everything, but for those of you that are listening to this podcast, I want to thank you very much for your time today. And if you would, please like me at YouTube or subscribe to my channel. And also follow me if you're listening to this podcast on Podbean, Stitcher, Spotify, or iHeart, or Pandora, or wherever it happens to be. Follow me and maybe give me a review. Who knows? Other than that, I want you all to have a really great day. 2021's looking up to be just as horrible as 2020. No, it's looking up to be better. It'll be better. Somehow, some way it'll get better. But with that, I want to say keep your chin up and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Please hit the subscribe button. I get a bonus for every subscriber and I only need 1,506 more to become a full-time paid employee. Help me please.